If you work in the public field and have non-mainstream opinions on important issues such as the Ukraine war, vaccines, gender ideology, or even the trend of confusing minors and persuading them to life-changing surgeries to make them feel comfortable with their bodies, they're kids, for God's sake. But if you express an opinion on one of these subjects, you were definitely called once or twice a Nazi. In fact, the bar for getting called a Nazi has become too low that anyone who stands slightly on the right side of radical yet self-proclaimed social justice warriors is now a Nazi. But what about the real Nazis? Like the ones who actually wear Nazi symbols on their uniforms and get all the support from the people calling you a Nazi for objecting to surgically mutilating minors and injecting people's arms with experimental drugs with possible side effects. These same people, and especially among the prostitutes who would gladly call you a Nazi, have a lot of work in their hands trying to explain how swastikas on the helmets of Ukrainian forces do not necessarily mean they are Nazis. Although the New York Times has been forced lately to address the Nazi problem among the armed forces of Ukraine, which has been carefully shielded from the mainstream masses in the West, of course for obvious reasons, they do it in a way that it is okay to continue supporting them as long as they're killing Russians, right? So the New York Times is now responding to the question of why some Ukrainian soldiers are pretty plainly pro-Nazi, but they did it in such a way that it's still okay to support them and send them weapons from our taxpayer money. Zero Hedge reported on this topic the following. The surprising Monday Times headline said that, quote, Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issues of history. This acknowledgement comes after literally years of primarily indie journalists and geopolitical commentators pointing out that yes, indeed, Ukraine's military and paramilitary groups, especially those operating in the East since at least 2014, have a serious Nazi ideology problem. This has been exhaustively documented again going back years, but the report, which merely tries to downplay it as a thorny issue of Ukraine's unique history, suggests that the real problem for Western PR is fundamentally that it's being displayed so openly. Ukrainian troops are being asked to cover those Nazi symbols, please, as Matt Taibbi sarcastically quipped in commenting on the report. So, according to the New York Times, Nazism is not the real problem, but rather the fact that we can see Nazi symbols that are very common on the uniforms of the Ukrainian armed forces. That's the problem. Therefore, some journalists ask these soldiers to take off their Nazi patches for photo shooting. Otherwise, they can't continue covering the war in favor of NATO and its stooge in Kiev, Zelensky. The New York Times report admits this has led to controversy, and newsrooms had to delete some photos of Ukrainian soldiers and militants. The photographs and their deletion highlights the Ukrainian military's complicated relationship with Nazi imagery, a relationship forged under both Soviet and German occupation during World War II, continues the report. So it's merely thorny and complicated, we are told. These are examples of the kind of patches that appear on Ukrainian military uniforms with some regularity, in the words of the New York Times. Look, I'm trying to get it that it's complicated and inconvenient for the narrative when Ukrainian soldiers wear Nazi patches. But what kind of journalists ask soldiers to remove them for photographs? For God's sake, that's the definition of prostitution. These journalists are nothing but useful tools for NATO, and their behavior indicates that they have sold their soul to money. If you're a journalist or photographer and you ask Ukrainian soldiers to take off Nazi patches before you take their picture, you aren't reporting. You are facilitating propaganda. I don't know what happened to journalism, but since corporations have taken over media outlets and since journalists accepting getting paid by them, they started calling from their ivory towers real journalists Nazis, who do actual reporting, investigation, and finding holes in the government's narratives. So if you're willing to get involved in the public field and probably become a journalist or a commentator, please Make sure to preserve your honor and dignity. Just don't sell your soul and do your best to serve your people and your community.